Welcome back to Authentic Living. I'm Courtney Shaw, and you're listening to 94.9 FM and AM 950 The Word. Our next guest is the gorgeous Jeanette Johnson. She writes about style full-time on her popular blog, Jay's Everyday Fashion. In addition to blogging, she regularly appears on morning shows and does a host of public appearances and speaking engagements. She and her husband, Josh, live here in Orlando. Jeanette, it's so great to have you in the studio today.
Thank
you look gorgeous
so much for
as
having
always.
me. So do you.
I love it. You are my authentic girl. What we see on social media is what we get in person, but you're more beautiful in person.
Oh, thank you.
Girl, you have got the glory
so
of God just shining through your life, and we're going to hit on that today. So congratulations on your new book. I love it. I love the color.
Thank you.
Love how vibrant and bright it is.
Yes.
It is a perfect reflection of who you are in Christ, and it's Jay's Everyday Fashion and Faith. So it's personal style with a purpose. I love that.
Yeah.
We're going to kind of unfold that today. I know we've got a short amount of time, but the good news is you're going to be coming back as one of my regular faith and fashion experts. So we can just unfold a little bit about the book today. And so why don't you introduce our listeners and viewers a little bit to who you are and how you got into the fashion industry?
Absolutely. So I started my blog 7.5 years ago, if you can believe it.
Wow.
And, the idea behind it was just, I really enjoyed fashion, but everything that was out there was so fantasy based, right? It was all really expensive. And I thought when I learned about the idea of blogging, it would be so neat to have a place that was just really focused on the practical side of fashion and just helping women find things on a budget, find things in their busy lives that work. And that was the big idea behind Jay's Everyday Fashion. And through sort of a interesting twist of events, I find myself doing that full time. Never thought that would happen.
That's
in
amazing.
A million years. And in that journey, I sort of realized that I always had a little bit of discomfort with that, just based on the personal values I was raised with, based on the faith that I was raised with. I just felt a little bit of tension there in working in fashion and then also being a person of faith. And it would come up from time to time in different settings. And this book was really just born out of me wanting to work through those questions in a public way so that if women are also questioning those things themselves, whether they work in fashion or whether they just enjoy dressing themselves, and what woman doesn't at times
Absolutely.
enjoy that process.
It's a part of everyday life, whether
It is.
whether we engage in it fully or not. And I thought it was really cool, one of the things you said in your book, that you described it as Jesus and fashion are like oil and water. In other words, they just don't mix a lot of times for people because what are the parameters? What are the guidelines? Is it okay, to express yourself in fashion? Is it, and then we're going to get into to talk about stewardship. What about spending all your money on fashion? That's not being a good steward of what God's given you. So unpack that a little bit too for us.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned stewardship because for me, that was sort of the biggest sticking point. So I think a lot of women, they have different points about fashion that might be their sort of shame point, whether someone shamed them maybe about modesty or it was about vanity or something along those lines. But for me, it was money. And I grew up in such a frugal household.
You're my Kansas girl, right?
I did.
We
grew
both
up
have Midwestern roots.
surrounded by farms in Kansas. And it just wasn't something you spent money and time on. It wasn't that I was necessarily shamed about it, but it was just really hard for me to spend any money on fashion, even when I needed it for a job interview. I share a story in the book where I literally lost out on a job opportunity.
Wow.
In my early 20s because I wouldn't buy.
You came in mom jeans.
Clothes.
What happened?
No, I just should have bought the suit.
Prepared. Yeah. And there's times, and I think that there's times that's been a philosophy of my mom, invest in your classic pieces because you're going to need those, to carry you throughout your work week or your career or whatever. So not to have that guilt and that shame attached to, to investing in good quality pieces of clothing.
Absolutely. So it kind of started from there for me. And that was sort of the biggest thing that I had to get over. I talk about in the book that setting a clothing budget in my early 20s because I realized not only did I miss out on a job opportunity, but once I got a job, I just felt really embarrassed a lot. I was underdressed. I was wearing jeans when I shouldn't have been. I was cold because I lived in Boston at the time. And it was just for practical reasons. I recognized that I struggled with that. And so I set a clothing budget to get myself to spend money, which is kind of interesting. And I detail all of that in the book. But for me, that was a really, really tough point. There are definitely some verses in the Bible that they urge us to, be a good steward of money and to help others with our money. And I still believe that. But I also believe that there is a place for the arts in our souls, in our budgets. And it's just all about finding that balance that works for you.
So how did you find your authentic voice in this space? Because you're going in a very secular, very fleshly driven, worldly driven, it's not less is more, it's more is more, it's extravagance, and so how did you find your voice, really created your own niche, taking a look from the runway and putting the look for less. And then, a lot of people will say, oh, the pride thing, like, oh yeah, I've got this outfit from such and such and so, but they won't tell you the goods. Like they actually got it at Ross or at Marshall's.
Yeah.
And I love how you just put it all out there, because it really empowers the everyday woman to go out and go, you know what? I can go by Ross or Target, or maybe I can invest in, the more expensive pairs of shoes, but you really unpack that in such a unique way. So how did you find your voice in the fashion world?
I really think, my blog was, if you want to call it secular, it is still secular. It was secular in the beginning, but ultimately it was founded with these values that I was raised on. So for me, I'm much more likely to boast about something being really inexpensive.
A bargain? That's my thing right there.
Because I love that aspect of it. And I think that there are a lot of women out there like that, and they were really drawn to that. But it's knowing, if you look, those values were always there. And this, for me, it is a bit of a departure to come out and write a book about it. But I think that we've gotten to a place now in fashion 7.5 years later where there's just so much on Instagram and everyone's lives are very filtered, and fashion has almost become even more shallow in some ways, I would say. And that I just really wanted to have these deeper conversations. I think women really want to have these deeper conversations too. There's just not always a place and a time for us to have them. And for me, it was just like, I've always operated with these values kind of as the foundation, and they're really important, but I want to talk about them. I want to talk about what goes into a decision of how do I balance this and this joy for fashion or decorating or hair and makeup or whatever your chosen art is, and the kingdom. Like, how do I balance those?
And not for it to be all consuming, because I think,
Absolutely.
again, it's just the same thing with physical exercise. We can get so consumed in what we eat and how we move our bodies, and that can become an all-consuming obsessive thing. But God's really given you such a cool revelation that's really out of the box. It's breaking out of this religious mindset, and you're inviting fashion into the conversation, but really making spirit-led choices, which is so liberating. And for me, I mean, that's kind of been my shopping fashion experience, because that's never been my strength. I've always been like, hey, I'm a purpose-filled shopper. I want to get in, get out. I'm on a mission. Whereas I grew up with a mom that just loves to, stroll and look at all the deals, and she knows where to find everything. And so I think that's a big struggle for women, because life is busy. How do they make time to be intentional about how they present themselves? Because you and I are both firm believers. If you look good, you do feel better and you feel more confident. That way you can let God shine through your life, and the message can be received as well.
Absolutely. I make a point. There's a whole chapter in the book that essentially says, okay, if this is such a struggle, fashion and faith, why not just do away with it altogether, right? Let's be Henry David Thoreau and just do the bare minimum and just throw it out the window, right? And I examine that from a purely just society standpoint and talk about the fact that our clothing is ultimately a very important form of nonverbal communication. It just is. I talk about in that chapter how I didn't get the job, for example, and other examples. It's just not something we can avoid. We have to get dressed. We're putting clothes on our body every day, and what we choose, no matter what, even if we think we're sitting out the topic. Like, I thought I was being clever in my early 20s, and I'm just going to sit it out altogether. It doesn't quite work that way.
No, it doesn't. The grunge look is out.
It's a little bit more challenging than that. And I'm all for, going to the grocery store in sweats occasionally. I do that all the time.
You don't get hooked up. It doesn't take you 3 hours, to get out of the house to go get, some milk at the grocery store. But
there's also a time and place for it. And then I think what's interesting for me is looking back, I was such a late bloomer to fashion. And what my clothing budget did for me more than anything, it set me free. Wow. But it also helped me tap into something that I can see the workings of from such a young age, that as a little girl, this was put on my heart to love this, and all of that sort of following the rules. And I was really kind of heavily into legalism, unfortunately, in high school. And
thank God for Jesus, right? I came to set the captives free.
Just wanting to follow the rules and follow the Bible to the T kept me from that. And what, in fact, I think is a gift that was put there by God, and for me is a way that I communicate with Him on a whole other level I had never experienced. So it's really interesting. It is a necessity. And at the same time, I think the enemy sort of uses that as a shaming or a guilting point, and you don't realize how much you might actually like it. Like, I think there's a lot of women who would really enjoy it if they would give it a chance and could feel less guilt about it.
Well, and I think a big part of that too, it's releasing that shame, and then also owning their personal style and just that freedom to be able to express their unique, fashion or their passion for fashion, and that you don't have to fit in this cookie cutter mold or box. And I think a big part of that too, it comes down to finances, and a lot of women feel like, well, I don't want to enter into that space because I felt I just don't have the money for that. And I've been a big, firm believer that I don't care where I get it, as long as we make it look good. You can take it. And I love how you can take a $10 dress and make it look like $1 million. And a funny story real quick, I had an event on Saturday night that I had hosted, and I had a full week. Didn't have time to go out shopping. And so I brought both of my kids with me, and I said, go look for pink. I'm hosting a breast cancer awareness event. So my daughter finds a dress. She pulls it. It was on clearance. It was 90% off, girl. It was normally $189. I got it for $18.05. And I got more compliments on that dress. And so I'm like, you know what? The Holy Spirit is your fashion shopper, and bring on your daughter Carrington too, right?
Yeah.
So there was freedom in that, because I knew I was going to wear the dress one time. I wanted to look good, feel good, so I could, let the ministry that was in me flow out and be confident. So how do you feel like fashion is the expression of worship unto God? Real quick.
Gosh, I mean, for me, it's the same idea that, if I'm going to go on a date with my husband, I'm thinking about looking pretty for him, and not in like, I have to, or nothing like that. It's just one of those things that if you're going to church or an event, I mean, you just want, at least for me, in certain situations, like I said, because I'm all about the sweats at the grocery store. Seriously, we've all been there. It just comes from that place for me, where it's just such a joy. It's a celebration of the colors he made, and it's a celebration of the fabrics that he gave us to work with. And it's a celebration of what I call, your inner beauty is your first layer of beauty. And then you've got your body as a second layer, and then your clothes is the third layer. It's literally the wrapping paper to your gift that's inside.
That's good.
And so it's like, it's just a celebration of that. And I know that it's hard to say that, because I know sometimes it's difficult. Like, we all struggle with finding the right fit or finding the right dress or budget. But I think that there are those little times for every woman where it just all kind of comes together, and you can feel that communion with God. You know what I mean?
It's spirit, soul, and body. We're a three-part being. And I love how you unpack that too, of just, the inner beauty, the body, and then the expression, the wrapping paper.
Yes.
And some of us need to get some new wrapping paper. Some of our wrapping paper is a little old and a little tattered. And you know what? I think, true, what's working on the inside manifests on the outside. So if God is doing a work on your life and he is taking you, giving you beauty for your ashes, why should that not reflect on the outside? So that's why I'm so excited to have you here long-term on this journey with us, and just to give us tips. And obviously on our Facebook page, we're going to share some of your, your side-by-sides. And obviously, some of the word in here is just so liberating. So I can't wait to share that with our guest. And I want to let everybody know where we can actually find your book. You can go to Jay's Everyday Fashion, right? .com. Want to give them the information?
Yep, that's my website, is jseverydayfashion.com. And you can get the ebook, the audiobook, and the regular book all on Amazon.
Awesome, Jeanette. Well, thanks so much for joining us on this very first episode of Authentic Living. You can stay connected and engaged with us throughout the week on the Authentic Living Show on Facebook and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. And if you have a prayer request, you can make sure to email us at authenticliving@gmail.com. Listen, it's time to find your authentic voice and share it with the world. We look forward to hearing from you and seeing you back next week at 3 p.m. on Saturday. This is 94.9 FM and AM 950 The Word, where faith comes by hearing.